Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood production. I am joined by a special guest who's going to be in the middle there. You don't know her, but you will know her, and you will love her. You got Elly Bird in the middle here, who just came off a very successful calling run, X3 in the calling, 21st, I believe. I don't 21st, 22nd. I'm pretty sure it's 21st, but
21st.
Top
21st.
32.
There we go. Top, yeah,
Yeah.
well within the top
Right,
32
right.
here, and then my
Immaculate
still
breakers.
immaculate breakers. And of course, showing my co-creator, co-commentator, co-caster, co-compatriot Rob on the
Hello.
bottom. Still pseudo recovering from the flu here, so he might sound a
Almost
little bit
there.
more muffled than usual. Almost there though. And we have probably one of my most favorite builds for Dash. It's the Habibi Dash, which refers to the Hanabi blaster. And
Yeah.
this is very much as just a framework before we get into it. This is one of those Dash builds that I don't think people usually expect when you flip up Dash as a hero. Not usually you expect to see the pistols, so it's a little bit interesting to have such a kind of divergence when everyone's talking about are they Lexi or Dromai, to have this build just come out of the scene and do very well. So brought Elly, of course, Elly part of the magnificent team Stroopwaffels. I have to mention that. This particular build also co-authored by Mr. John Ho, which put a lot of time into this. So shout out to John also.
His brain is so big. It's unbelievable.
The man cooks. He should be a chef at this. He should just open a restaurant at this point. We're gonna start pretty much the same basic topics. Start with the equipment, main board, and sideboard. So I guess with the equipment first, we're gonna pick up the two pieces that people probably have the most questions about: Hanabi Blaster and adaptive plating. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody knows what adaptive plating does,
I had to
but
read it again.
Many
brand
people
new
did.
bright lights. So let's start with adaptive plating here. Why is this in your kind of main arm piece?
Um, this card, like 95% of the time, just occupies the exact same niche that Galvanic Bender does. The Battle Worn isn't exactly relevant because I'm not really trying to build a robot on my opponent or anything like that. Um, and then in some matchups where the extra block might be important, especially I find it into like Azalea, where you kind of have to cover. You have to be like, oh, panic, throw as much fridge as something as I possibly can.
Yeah.
It's really easy to cash in an item that's about to expire on its own terms, anyways, for 2 extra life, and maybe to deny like a riddle.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That how often do you galvanize this thing? Just out of curiosity.
That's a good question. I don't
That's why I
like. I
asked.
think a lot of the time. Okay. I think a lot of the time it's just a galvanic bender. I think it usually ends up getting
Yeah.
galvanized if like the hit is like less than half the time. It's just if the hit is like oh, I'm going to lose my turn.
Sure. Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
the Hanabi blaster here. Let's pop it. I'm pretty sure people forgot this was a dynasty. I don't know if people remember that set.
Yeah.
I didn't really like that set much myself here, but we do have the Hanabi blaster, 5 power, overpower. Once per turn, remove 2 steam counters attack, and then third time you play a card with boost. You don't, not the third time you boost. That caught a lot of people off guard. It's the third time you play a card that says boost on it. Put a steam counter on it. So this definitely incentivizes you to play 3 per turn, essentially. So 0 cost, 1 cost being important. In this case, using Crankshaft Hyperdriver to be able to pay for triple boost cards. But kind of explain to me how you are playing Hanabi Blaster in this deck compared to like how someone would expect a pistol would go, like a regular Tectoplasma pistol.
I think fundamentally, like the biggest reason to have Hanabi blasters that it's just a touch more optimal over pistol in like 90% of dash turns, where across 2 turns you kind of have pistols worth 2, and then pistols worth 2, and then if you can kind of keep the gravy train rolling with Hanabi blaster, you kind of get an extra zero point 0.5 value like every other turn, as it's 5 in that same time frame. The big thing is that you kind of get pushed into playing like largely pitchless to make this sort of thing happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think the overpowers, like what's the most important piece of text on this thing? The fact that it doesn't cost anything to shoot, the fact that it says overpower on it. What do you think is like the most important thing that makes this weapon viable?
Might be a weird answer, but I think it depends a lot on the matchup. I find that into decks where I'm trying to outrace them, I'm most pleased with it being completely free. And then the overpower is just, it's so good in the end game against heroes like Bravo, where you might otherwise have a hard time punching over their 12 block every hands.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Yeah, it kind of has that if you're able to keep it going. It has that hybrid efficiency versus like every deck. So that kind of makes sense. Very, very strong gun. Not even a pistol at this point. It's a gun.
A gun is not a pistol.
A gun is not a pistol. People need to understand that. So that's I think we could probably skip over. I think Crown, Achilles, Tekla Foundry, pretty self-explanatory in this deck. We can kind of move on to the main board, and the main board is definitely full of fun cards from Bright Lights and cards that people forgot existed. I'm sure. From like Jumpstart and like Crankshaft Hyper, data link from Bright
Old
Lights.
Data Link.
So let's go over kind of the main boost package. The key ones I want to go over are, first of all, I see the one hyperdriver, and that kind of gets me thinking, is that always your starting item? I guess in the main build as Dash, you're just always starting with hyperdriver here.
Yeah, always asterisk. With the exception of like if you're going into fatigue, there's something that we'll probably touch on later that is a little better if you kind of know going in that what they want to do is just run you out of cards. But otherwise, it's always hyperdriver.
That makes sense. Out of the new boost cards, we have Data Link, Expedite,
Underloop,
Underloop. Sprocket Rocket. Man, these cards are great. Rev Up.
Rocket.
I mean, I know there's Big Bertha down at the bottom there also. I think we have like blue. We have like
there's a blue, I believe.
Yeah, we got the blue Big Bertha.
We've got
blue too, red.
Yeah.
So in the main board, as far as the new cards go, which one of the ones can you see as like the auto includes that you think like everybody need to be running this build? And are there some of those that you maybe were kind of like, I need to fill this 60, let's put this one in over, like, let's say like, because you don't run like yellow T-bone, for instance, right? So why would you run like something like, what's the logic behind that essentially?
The big thing is, and I think it's something you can kind of see if you go back and look at a lot of Hanabi Blaster lists prior to the release of Bright Lights, is that like you just lose so much card equity on running these 0 costs that you use to power your Hanabi Blaster by playing like Blue T-Bone or Blue 0 to 60. Though, I mean, it's a blue block 3, so it's hard to actually cut that card, but it's not something you're throwing that frequently. And I think all 3 of them are pretty close to equal in my eyes. They're mostly tied for my 3 favorite head jabs. The big thing is that they just all needed to be red, so you're gonna see 3 red, 3 red, 3 red over, red, yellow, blue of a given set.
Okay, that makes sense. The Hyperdriver S card, so we have Crankshaft, Jumpstart Red, and Big Bertha. Is there a reason why you kind of have as many of those effects in the deck as you do? Like maybe like, why don't you have yellow Jumpstarts? Why is there only 2 yellow Crankshafts? That kind of stuff. Is it just about how often they pop up, or was there something else that I'm not seeing here?
A big part of it is like specifically on the Crankshaft and Bertha effects is that you really never want to be like actually running out of Bertha. Same thing with like there being less yellow crankshafts than red and blue is it's like the blue crankshafts succeed at being a blue block 3, which is very like baseline. And 2 for 5 isn't like the absolute worst rate you've ever paid on a card if it has go again. It starts to get a little sketchy with like a 3 for 6 with go again because it's an entire card, and then more importantly, it's not something you can throw off of just a hyperdriver trigger, even if you foundry hard it. If your hand is like 3 zeros and a Bertha, it's pretty disastrous if you end up having to like throw that card. The jump starts are I actually messed around with yellow jumpstart for quite some time in a slot similar to Rev Up. Just because like yellow zipper hit is almost as good of a card as red zipper hit, but I think you just wanted kind of an increased red density to just like keep pressuring these like 15 to 18 power turns until you can like really smack them.
Hmm. That makes sense. The other piece that I noticed here is if we scroll down,
Mm-hmm.
we still have 2 Teklo cores in the list, which I always struggle with this card, whether I want to run 1, 2, or 3. It's probably the one thing I struggle with the most when like making, I guess
Yeah.
specifically dash builds, right? As a dash specialization, but an IO or regular dash, whatever. So why did you settle on 2?
Um, Specifically two is you just never really want to draw two in the same hand, and that's pretty unlikely
Sure.
with just two in the deck. You want to see it most games, but it's not like a linchpin. You're not just guaranteed to lose if you don't see it. And then there's a third one in the board for the situations where it's like, well, I actually might lose this game if I don't find a
Mm,
Right.
Teklo core.
Okay. So
right,
you
that makes
just
sense.
wanted to minimize the potential of you just drawing 2 in a hand where you don't want 2 blue non-blocks, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. I do see like the sparks in the deck. Obviously, you
Yeah.
can fish out those Teklo cores, and the expedites obviously can actually just play the Teklo core on hit, which is kind of nice. Uh, why is this is one super out of left field? Why no Med-X? Come on now, it's the best. It's the best pun of the set, other than Fender Bender. That one's pretty good too.
Right, right.
But Med-X is pretty good. So why do we have the 0 for 3 but not the 1 for 4?
You don't like the pun on Underloop? I feel like it's like half as good.
Oh, I just I just think it's kind of lazy, and I don't
Just
like.
like
I
slightly worse than
understand.
Overloop, but now we call it Underloop.
It's just like a what I don't know. I think it's good in this particular build because like getting more cards back in deck is like a reasonable effect to have in this type of deck. But yeah, I just prefer Med-X is just so funny. So why no Med-X? It's
The
very
big
specific, I
thing
know.
is that outside of core, the on hit basically doesn't matter.
Right.
Um, something John said about the deck that both cracked me up and I found like very true is that like none of the 1 for 4s, you really only have space for one of them, and then like they're all exactly the same because none of their hit triggers are basically ever going to matter. Into
Right.
fatigue, like they're probably just not gonna let you have the underloop.
Yeah,
And then like yeah, that sort of thing.
yeah.
Specifically, Med-X isn't in the deck over Underloop for like that exact purposes. There's really only space for one kind of underwhelming boost card. Um,
Mm-hmm.
There. Okay.
One it's a space filler, and the hit trigger rarely matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Describe to me your kind of ideal play pattern and hands with the deck. So, what I mean by that is just into not into a specific matchup, just like the core deck itself. What do you want to draw on the opener, and how do you want to combo off with this deck? Just to provide kind of a bit of an example for viewers.
For sure. I think like generally just like as like a couple turns, like going first, for example, might go is like what I really want to see is like 0, 0, 1 or like 0, 1, 1, and then like a card I really don't mind being in my arsenal, or like 0, 0, 2, it doesn't matter. Just something where I can like attack, 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 counter in Hanabi, maybe I leak a couple points of damage because max rate kind of tends to be pretty good on a lot of those openers. But it's like the ideal like turn 0 is just like counter on Hanabi, pretty good card in my arsenal. Go ahead because I'm gonna get ideally hit you very hard next turn. And then from there, I think just what you want to see is some combination of like hands that can pretty easily throw maximum velocity, lining up with. It's kind of easy to force them to line up, I guess, where you can like draw a max V, and then your goal for that turn is to just like put a counter on and maybe fire Hanabi Blaster, get the max V in your arsenal, and that's not so painful. And like the ideal situation is usually just alternating turns that are like max V or something similarly debilitating, like a Pulse Wave Harpoon, where it might not damage their life total, but it pretty severely gimps their game plan. And then the next turn you shoot them with the gun, and then the next turn you hit them really hard.
Sure. So you're just kind of alternating
Back and
between
forth.
like more charger. Like you ideally want to load the blaster as much as you can.
Right.
Does that include turn 0 going first? Do you is there ever a scenario where you can have a turn that loads Hanabi Blaster? Maybe like in one scenario you don't get an arsenal, or like maybe one scenario you do get an arsenal. Is there ever situations where you're just like, yeah, this particular turn I'm just gonna like pitch a bunch of try to get cards in my hand, but more on a setup way, not really charging blaster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like situations where I might go off Arsenal to put a counter on blaster are like I have a card that really sucks and I don't want it in my arsenal, like a blue Big Bertha being my last card in my hand is like not a very attractive situation. So I'll just like go like attack and pitch it where I can. If it means putting a counter on blaster, I generally prioritize that over an arsenal just because it ends up being worth a lot of value.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then, you often have hands where it's like 0, 1, 1, 2, and they're all reds, and you're just like, I'll just arsenal this throttle and throw it over to you, and I'm not really that hurt.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. I think that was a pretty good rundown on the main board here. So we can scroll a little bit further down and look at the inventory. Now this is an inventory right here. So, I mean, I've got questions. I'm sure everybody else has questions, but I guess we'll start with the equipment. We'll leave Big Bertha last. We'll start with the equipment. So you have
for last.
You have Visiatronic, Tecloplasma, and Goliath. Let's start with like the two mech pieces. So the Visiatronic and the Teclo. Why are they in the deck?
The Tecloplasma pistol, namely, is just it's there in the sideboard. That's like the question I think I get the most is like, do you still have a pistol plan? And it's like, no, but there's one in there and it has Iyslander's name on it, and that's pretty much it. Is like it's pretty hard to get 3 chain links wide into Iyslander, especially in a deck that's trying to play pitchless, into a deck that can play Channel Lake Frigid on your turn. It's just a lot easier to like convert 1 to 2 mana into 1 damage, because you're probably just not getting the efficiency out of blaster that you want.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's very like targeted specifically into. Specifically Iyslander, we just really can't get constant Hanabi loads. So that makes sense. Is that the same for like Visiatronic's going to be into like wizard decks essentially just for AB? Okay.
Yeah. It's AB3 without really compromising your game plan at all. Having AB3 while having Foundry Heart and a Goliath Gauntlet is pretty sick. I don't think that's anything new though.
Yeah, that's fair. Goliath Gauntlet. I guess the question is, first, why is it kind of, because this seems like more of an aggressive leading deck. You would think this is more like a main board slot versus like adaptive plating in an inventory, but you have it in the inventory here. So I'm kind of curious where it's coming in and why it's here.
The big thing is that because of the Galvanize ability on adaptive plating, it's really good at protecting a max velocity in your arsenal from a Command and Conquer. This deck is really good at playing pitchless, so it's often down to like give your opponent a card and an armor every now and then to like kind of stay ahead. And that's something I find myself doing like most games, especially into the deck to beat Lexi is she's feeling pretty smug over there, going like arrow CNC, and you're like, okay, well I'm gonna give you my gloves, this core that's on 1, and like a blue Bertha, and then I'm going to maximum velocity you, and you're going to be really sad about it.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So it's mainly about being able to keep the let's use the magic word, keep the tempo up from those kind of aggressive matchups. That makes sense. So is Goliath mainly just to like push over more defensive decks? Is that the idea?
I find myself enjoying it into decks that are trying to block me out, where I can kind of use it to go like Foundry Heart. That's like probably my favorite play pattern in the entire deck is like attack. I have 1 floating, break chain, Foundry Heart, Goliath Gauntlet, 12. Have a good time. And that's a really fun way to get over fatigue. And then the other times are like into decks that are kind of all just damage. I like it a lot in the mirror. It's nice in Defy, where you're probably just going to throw a card at his Mask of Momentum trigger if he's even on it. That sort of thing.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Let's go with the eye. So you have a 3rd core in there, and you've got 3 pounders. I mean, I feel like I know the answer, but why are the core and the 3 pounders there? What specifically are you worried about?
Also fatigue. They're there for punching over.
Yeah. So the main matchups that you're talking about, I guess Guardian would be the big one. I guess is coming up as a premier fatigue now that Oldhim is gone. because I don't think this deck had anything to do with beating Oldhim. I don't think it can back in the day. So
Not
now
at
that
all.
that's gone, you could beat Bravo. You can beat. It's possible. So it kind of makes sense. Now, when you run the Pounder, are you always starting with it when you are bringing it in the list? Do you like always
I'm
start
never
Pounder?
starting it.
So you're always going to start Driver even when you have like Pounder cited.
Yeah, it's just too important for your curve. I find this is something John would probably disagree with me on. I think it's distinctly possible he would start Pounder. There's another item in the inventory that he's pretty keen on starting into Fatigue and then like sparking for Driver as soon as possible. Which kind of reminds me a lot of like Bolton setup where you might like beacon for Necklace pretty quick. I think it's mostly preference. I don't like to start Pounder just because like driver's just way too important.
Mhm.
Rev Up is like a pretty yucky card when you don't control a driver.
That's true.
And
3 for
that's
6
just
is
not something I want to run into.
3 for 6 ain't great. So that definitely makes sense. The extra blues there, you have T-bones. Is that just mainly like Iyslander, or is there any other particular reason you have those blues?
Yeah, they're also nice for like kind of just like making a really fat deck into Fatigue, and it's an extra blue into Iyslander, and then it's flexible into Guardian because it's a blue 0 cost that can actually do some pretty serious damage by eating 2 to 3 points of armor.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. The last 2 items here, one of them brand new, and one of them I know pretty well, right? Rob might remember
Yeah,
this
I
card
remember
too.
this one.
You would.
Let's start with Plasma Mainline. Why is
Yeah.
this card in the deck, and why do you need to go to TCG Player and buy a cold foil ace?
I had kind of a funny thing happen actually, where I was like looking for a plasma main line for the calling, and a couple of my locals who are like frequently reasonably interested in what I'm doing were like, "What? Plasma main line?"
Yeah.
Broken.
It's broken. It's busted. It's just pretty consistently worth a lot of value, and getting a lot of value out of a card is like it's just the name of the game in this deck. I think this card, if you like know for sure going into the game, like it's an open deck list kind of situation, or you're aware of your opponent, like maybe you play Charles Dunn round 5 and get fatigued. Not to get too specific. This card is just really sweet because 1 counter off of it onto your hyperdriver represents another turn where you can kind of keep hyperdriver going. Maybe you spark for it. 1 counter off of this onto the other item that's sitting there is pretty sweet. It's just pretty consistently the counter that comes from it is worth 2 or more value. Core's 2 mana, Pounder's 2 damage, and when you can get 10 value out of something that starts on board, I think you're pretty happy.
That makes sense. Of course. Now, okay. Let's repeat this for everybody. When you have Plasma Mainline in the deck, do you still start with Driver?
No, actually.
We've changed our script here.
Absolutely. Hey, script.
Exactly.
The next one.
Exactly. I do start mainline if it's in the deck. If I'm bringing in mainline into a deck I think that is going to try to fatigue me, I am starting Plasma mainline because it just represents so much.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
You don't want to be playing a bunch of items and then draw this thing later and then not know what to do with it.
Oh,
Take all your
no.
items out. Yeah.
And it's a red. It's disastrous.
No block. Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. Penetration script. Your mech, yeah, thanks, Rob. Your mech attack cost.
Yeah.
I was thinking about polarity, but that's -1 on the blocks, right? So this one is +1 on the mech attack action. Why is 1 copy of penetration script in the list?
Actually, the other card you mentioned there, Polarity Reversal Script, is a pretty attractive candidate for this exact same slot. I think they're pretty close. It just depends on how many D-Reacts you think your opponent trying to fatigue you might be on.
Right.
I digress. This card comes in tandem with Plasma Mainline. You are going to start Plasma Mainline, and you're going to spark for this card, and you're going to have a free Art of War for 3 turns, and that's pretty sick.
Yeah. That's
pretty much it. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Now, the one that everyone's been wondering about, Red
Big Bertha.
Martha.
Now, why are there? I mean, it's a pauper. Don't get me wrong, but why are there 2 red Big Berthas in the inventory? And when are you bringing these in?
Dromai is the
Shocking.
answer to
Okay, yeah,
why.
yeah.
Yeah, shocking, shocking. And like these specifically as my last couple poppers because they're boost cards, so if I have to throw them, I'm not as sad as I could be about playing a 3 for 6, as opposed to something like Big Shot, though I have been considering Big Shot in the deck, especially after talking to Merrick and hearing some of his ideas about Dash and the deck after the calling is concluded. But it's specifically because you are going to have a bigger deck against Dromai. It increases your crankshaft density, which lets you keep Hyperdriver around longer, which is pretty important.
Right. Yeah, it's just because you're still gonna boost in that matchup. At least if you boost this thing away, you're not crying. So
Exactly.
that definitely makes sense, especially with Dromai being probably the first deck on everyone's mind now that Lexi is gonna be LL'd real soon, a couple weeks actually.
Mhm.
So definitely something to consider here. So that was all the sideboard cards. We'll go over a couple of the main matchups, and then if there's something else you brought up in your X3 record there that any hero mentioned that maybe a specific side was good, bad, maybe could have changed a little bit. But let's start with I guess you can mention Lexi for anyone bringing this to a ProQuest because there's still 2 weeks of ProQuest as of
Right.
this recording. So if someone wants to bring this to a ProQuest, let's go over the Lexi sideboard first.
So Lexi, you're actually just playing completely unboarded. There's a consideration to take Goliath Gauntlet, I think, leading up to the calling, especially testing with Yugi. I just like went back and forth like so many times on do I take plating or do I take Gauntlet? I think I landed on plating just specifically because of Remorseless and how prevalent Remorseless is in a lot of those like Wolfpack Lexi decks, where it's just like pretty commonly a 3 of, no questions asked. Being able to just cover that pretty painlessly is nice, especially if they do like +1 and you just like plating in a card, go away, please.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Outside of that, you pretty much just play like exactly mainboarded. Um, I think the matchup is like realistically pretty close, but I often feel quite favored just because of raw. Like, can I curse? Am I allowed?
I mean, yeah, you could curse. That's fine.
Okay, I feel like I get pretty far ahead in that matchup just on like raw ape fuck power. Just like I just go, I hit them really hard. They usually find themselves blocking, and then the deck blocks pretty well, so it's easy to keep tempo if they do something like Ice Quake, Rain Razors or something.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And so you're going. Obviously, you want to go second in this matchup if you can, and just
Given.
pedal to the metal. Not the literal card, but pedal to the metal.
That card sucks.
The card real bad, but in this particular case, the underlying message is the same here. So go second, run the main, and just like, is there another card you were kind of because you obviously. I imagine you played a couple Lexis. I mean, I know you played. You got to play at least one Lexi at a calling here.
I did play at least one.
Is there another card you're a little bit other than Remorseless? Is there another card where you really wanted to block as frequently as you could?
I think it kind of just comes down to the stuff that you'd like pretty much expect to want to block out. If you find yourself capable of shutting down a premeditate, though that's kind of fantasy land, it's pretty worth it. A Heatseeker to take her off Arsenal and kind of stay ahead. That sort of thing. Endless Arrow, you have a lot of armor, it's pretty painless to give them a card on that. Just a lot of your like very typical must blocks.
Okay, so nothing particularly special other than Remorseless definitely hurts your deck. That's
Remorseless hurts a lot.
It does hurt a lot. So that one definitely sticks out as one that you would look at here. So that was Lexi. Dromai, probably the second most represented. Well, I know for a fact it was the second most represented deck. So what's your board into Dromai?
Into Dromai specifically, I am going to bring in a spare core, all 3 pounders, maybe Goliath Gauntlet. I keep going back and forth on this one. Probably Goliath Gauntlet. It's just being able to deny Kyloria with the gloves is pretty nice.
Right.
Because that dragon is particularly scary when the only item you control, or just when they can steal your hyperdriver at all. Core, the 3 pounders, and the 2 red Big Berthas. Yeah. You just don't side anything out. You just make your deck bigger.
Okay, so we're making the deck bigger. We're putting in the items. We want to get over like Dromai does have a lot of 3 block. Like, obviously, the invokes block. They can go over pretty well. They have a bunch of D reacts. It is possible for them to try to fatigue. They have some armor, so trying to get above those breakpoints particularly good in this deck here. So that was Dromai. I think Katsu is probably the next biggest. Is Katsu or Bravo? One of the two. Well, let's start with Katsu. What's your main plan into Katsu?
I was actually pretty surprised by how I felt quite in control into pretty much every single ninja, Fire or Katsu I played this weekend. It just felt like there was very little they could do to both not take a lot of damage and then have a reasonable return. Especially when the deck just has so much armor. You don't need to like change your sideboard plan at all into Katsu. You just like take your typical setup. That's a pretty common theme with this deck. The main deck is pretty optimized to be good into most of the field and do its thing, and have good numbers. And then the sideboard is like very silver bullet heavy.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so keep the board the same into Katsu makes sense. Or at Fi, I guess we could put Fi on that list also. That one might be coming up as.
I would definitely swap to Goliath Gauntlet, but that's.
Oh, just for racing, essentially.
Yeah, especially with like Emberblade and Lynx being a little more attractive at the moment, I think.
Right.
It just doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, no, it's true. Less on hits means less need for armor. Bravo. So that's a matchup that I think. I mean, since the dawn of time, Bravo v Dash always a coin flip for no matter who's playing it. So what's your game plan versus Bravo?
I think in Swiss in particular, I am just going to bring in like core 3-pounders, blue T-bones, red Berthas, and Goliath Gauntlet and just go as fast as possible, unless it's like I have seen the person I'm playing against stack and I know that their plan is to fatigue me, in which case I will bring in like mainline script, pounders, and a core.
Okay, that makes sense. So so with no knowledge whatsoever, you're gonna leave the mainline script alone and just go with the extra 3 blocks, and then the pounder core to go over. But if you know or have some kind of knowledge, then you're bringing in your like anti-fatigue, like your specific anti-fatigue package is the idea.
Yeah, specifically, it's like that just because if you start mainline and kind of commit yourself to this game plan that involves taking a couple slightly slower turns where you're maybe not pushing much more than Bravo can comfortably block, and they've made the assumption that you're like starting chamber, building pistol, they are going to have brought in like Zealous Belting, Rouse the Ancients, and Light and Strike, and you're probably just going to get your skull caved in.
Yeah,
And that's a pretty depressing way for that matchup to go.
fair enough. Yeah, it's also you have to assume what they're on. They have to assume what you're on. So definitely something to keep in mind with siding. Ice. I don't know. I guess Iyslander is always kind of there. What's your kind of specific plan into Iyslander?
Iyslander in specific, I don't think you bother with the pounders just because I think you pretty comfortably you could reasonably bring them in just because they're blues. But you pretty comfortably present more damage than she already wants to block, so it's not a matter of getting fatigued or not like getting there. It's mostly a matter of not getting disrupted so hard that you just lose the game, which I think obviously you bring Visiertronic, so like if you're kind of like frosted out of your turns, you can just like block a lot and just wait until you kind of have a bit more of a green light. Blue T-Bone is another blue. It blocks 3 if she decides to throw a Scar or a Bully your way. I think you bring Goliath Gauntlet over Adaptive Plating for similar reasons. She has almost no on-hits. And third, I don't remember if I said it already, but third core because it's third core. And Mana's good into her.
Yes, core is
and Pistol.
very, very good.
Pistol.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the one reason you have Pistol.
The one reason I have Pistol. Bring Pistol.
Right. There are a couple other fringe matchups. I don't know if you played into them or if you have a specific plan. This is kind of like we're talking about Dori, Azuri. I say fringe because like they kind of come in and come out depending on like what meta people think there are. Like I don't know how many Azuris there are going to be when Lexi LLs kind of thing.
Yeah,
there might be a bunch. I don't know what people want to play, but that's what I'm kind of talking about. Are there any of like those matchups that you want to maybe Levia? I don't know, man. Are there any of those matchups you want to talk about?
I think specifically a thing to watch out for is that with like you mentioned Dori, if you kind of see a hero across the table from you where you think it's pretty reasonable, that they see how much damage you're doing and the fact that you're boosting a lot, and they decide like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and block and hope they run out of gas, and that's my out here. I think any decks where you like reasonably suspect that they might be capable of doing that, I think it's a pretty safe hedge to just drop the 4 blue items from your board into the main deck, because they're not that painful to draw. You have Crown of Providence to get rid of them if they are that bad. And they just kind of keep you from getting fatigued in a matchup that you otherwise would have won if you had a little extra gas.
Right. And that's kind of like we're talking about Dory with like the fridge.
Azuri.
Yeah, Azuri Bravo obviously coming in there very specifically though. Any am I missing any heroes that have really come up that often?
Azalea, maybe?
Yeah, you
It's a
know
good
what?
one.
Azalea
Yeah.
is. I mean,
She's pretty hot on the block lately.
Yeah.
literally won the calling before
That's
Dallas,
right.
so like
True.
probably on people's minds here. So any specific thing against Azalea, or you're just kind of running the main board?
Mostly the main board. I bring in the blue T-bones just in case by some miracle I end up having like 2 to 3 T-bones in hand. Before or after snaps, you can get her pretty hard. Like I think stealing cross wrap and or tunic in that matchup just swings it so far in your favor. Adaptive plating is the main board there, but I do want to point out like how just incredibly good it is in that matchup.
Right.
I played 2 Azaleas at the calling, and I won both of those games on turn cycles where they threw like a very large arrow, and I just kind of was like, well, I'm just gonna toss 7 armor at this and come back at
Right.
you really hard. And it was just such a big swing that it put me
Yeah.
far enough ahead.
Yeah, that makes sense because you can block with Crown Title. You could block 2, 2, 3, and then block with a 3 block from hand if it's dominated.
Yeah.
So you can block 10 off a dominant arrow, and they usually
Pretty gross.
push
Yeah.
more than 10 unless they have like a 5-card hand or something like that. So it's definitely definitely strong because you always start with an item and dash. So
You always have
Galvanize
them.
is
Yeah.
so it was always on, especially in the early period. The last kind of piece I was wondering is the overperformer, underperformer, and I kind of like this segment the most because it kind of gives you a bit more future thinking into the deck, because decks obviously evolve based on the meta, based on cards available. Do you have any specific cards that you thought overperformed or underperformed, and why?
Cards I was particularly unimpressed with were yellow crankshaft. That seems not surprising. It was just kind of
Yeah.
like I kept it in because I think the math on those 2 yellow crankshafts changes your likelihood of driver dying on 3 by a lot. I think
Hmm.
I think just those 2 cards changes how frequently it dies by something obscene, like a third of the time. It it dies a third of the time less on 3.
Yeah.
Just because of those. But I think in retrospect, what I would probably do is cut those yellow crankshafts and just move the red Big Berthas to the main, and you kind of have 2 more slots to work with. And then the card, I know I talked about all the head jabs being mostly equal to me, but I guess that was kind of a lie, because the card I was like absolutely the most impressed with was red Data Link. That card
Yeah.
really
Opt one,
sweet.
huh?
Yeah, the opt one just helps a lot. Sometimes you see a max velocity on the top and you're like, ooh, I don't really want to get rid of that. Or sometimes you just get to dig for a crankshaft effect, and it's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that's true because you can dig on your second boost, hit the crankshaft, and then hit it for sure. You know, you have the hyperdriver trigger, which is quite nice. Not boosting away max V seems really strong.
Quite helpful.
Kind of your win con in a lot of these matchups. So that makes sense. So overperform on Data Link, underperform on crankshaft. The last thing that I had were kind of cards that I thought about that I was curious why they weren't in the list. First one was Twin Drive.
Twin Drive.
As like the solid, just like blue 0-cost boost Twin Drive Max V off Foundry Heart being like the new cookie cutter combo, which is obscenely powerful that you couldn't do before. So that's the first one, I think. So maybe a little bit about why, if you tested that in general, and maybe why it's not in the deck.
The big thing is generally that like hands that do that are it's just like this is going to sound completely deranged. But hands that do that are often less damage than you want to be putting out on a given turn cycle. In this deck, I
So
think
greedy.
it's really greedy. It's an incredibly greedy deck. But it works pretty well. That was a bit of a tangent, but that was like because the deck is so greedy, I really thought I would be like softer to being targeted. But once I got to like the top tables and in day 2, and people definitely like knew what I was doing,
Yeah.
it just held up incredibly well. I just had a lot of games that I really did not think would go as well for me as they did, and I just like came at them really hard, really fast, and it's in the game of Flesh and Blood, it's pretty hard to keep up with 20 damage a turn, and
Yes.
pitching blue and going like, 3, 5, 10 is pretty good, but you actually just already have an onboard tool for presenting 20 on that turn, and I find that the slot Twin Drive might be in, because you can't get too greedy with your curve, is Rev Up slot, and I like the popper, and I think you would also be shocked at how often the difference between 5 and 6 matters.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Especially into aggro decks that just don't have as many 3 blocks. It's just leaking more damage more. And there's a lot of armor that blocks for 2 also, temper and stuff like that. So definitely makes sense there. I think that was the other one was Magnetic Shockwave, but I think it kind of goes in this deck doesn't make a lot of sense just because you're trying to maximize the damage here. So I'm guessing the reason why it's in here is it just doesn't really fit with the theme of the deck.
Yeah, that and mostly, like, I think the biggest reason to be playing Magnetic Shockwave right now is the Lexi matchup.
Sure.
Outside of it being incredibly easy to include Blue Block 3. And I just found that into most games, because Lexi is Lexi, like it's really hard unless it's like turn 1, turn 2, and Tumultai is the same way, I think. It's just so hard for Eating Their New Horizons to actually matter that much as far as like the macro game goes.
Sure. Okay. That definitely makes sense. That was all the questions I had. This deck obviously is insanely fun because you just go zoom. But
Yeah.
the key part I think is what do you think about this deck going into a Lexi-less meta? Because that's obviously, I mean, Worlds would be well. I'm sure there's a calling before then too, but like post LL, what do you think you would want to change other than the crankshafts? Was there anything you're kind of thinking about the deck, or do you think it'd be a strong contender into a maybe more Dromai filled meta kind of thing? What do you think?
Definitely what I was considering was moving the Berthas to main, kind of increasing your popper density and dropping those yellow crankshafts. A card I was looking at specifically going forward with Lexi gone, that kind of improves your matchup as there are more and more and more and more Dromais in the meta, especially after Tome was printed, is Big Shot. I'm actually pretty impressed with that card. I didn't think I would like it that much, but maximum velocity is pretty sweet, and minimum velocity can be too.
Minimum velocity. Yeah, that's what Big Shot is. It definitely makes sense. Big Shot being the new bright lights card. Was a 2 for 6, but it could be a 2 for 8
3 for
essentially.
6.
Oh, it was a 3 for 6, but it could be a 3 for 8. That's correct. Yes. Oh man, it'd be It'd be way too broken.
It would be ridiculous.
It's a rare. Yeah, it's a rare. So I guess it can't be that good. But okay, no, that totally makes sense. Well, appreciate your time for coming on, Elly. I mean, congratulations again on the top 32 at the Calling Dallas, and you are going to be I mean, I know you're going to be at Worlds, but in case anyone's curious, Elly will be at Worlds if you want to say hi to her. She might say hi back. You never know. But
I will. I love people. I love meeting people. It's one of my favorite things about this game.
Yeah, just bring your marble Hanabi and get her to sign it, and it might be worth something one day. Give her.
Please just have me sign this sleeve. I think writing on the card would destroy me.
Well, we'll see what people want here. But do you have any last thing? Do you have any shoutouts you want to give?
Mainly just to all my friends and teammates and my girlfriend. It was very crazy to like I spent a lot of time like playing Magic, and it was like pretty crazy to like after playing card games for just a really long time, like actually have like a pretty decent finish. It was the best I've ever done, and it was pretty surreal. I've had a lot of fun, and just a lot of the people I've met this weekend that have just been like a delight to talk to, like Merrick. It's been pretty cool, pretty sweet. And you, I appreciate you having me on. I think that's incredibly cool.
Well, I'm sure our viewers are gonna. I mean, they obviously love Dash content. It's Shadow Spark of Genius,
Yep.
but I'm sure a lot of them are gonna give this a shot because it's an insanely fun deck to play.
I hope so.
Fun and unique too. I think it looks really great.
Oh yeah, it's a very good deck. So with that, appreciate everyone for watching from wherever you are in the world. Have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Bye for now.